Hi, I'm Alex from the Zscaler Customer Success Engineering team. In this series of short videos, we're taking a look at the baseline recommendations for configuring Zscaler Private Access. This is part 4, Building Policy. First, let's start by taking a look at what policy might look like as a ZPA deployment and the Zero Trust Application Access journey progresses. Here we have an example policy for day 1 of a ZPA deployment. In this case, we can see that the policy is configured as very straightforward. First, at the very bottom of the list, we have a global allow all policy that's configured as a wildcard segment. This will perform application discovery and allow us to create application segments from our discovered applications later on. Here, even on day 1 of our deployment, we've already identified one critical application, app1, which we've configured as a specific segment with specific access policy. In this case, we've created an allow app1 for engineering rule that allows access to the application for anyone who's a member of the engineering group. And then a second rule behind it that blocks access to our critical business application, app1, for all users. Much like other ordered policy lists in other parts of Zscaler products, in this case, the first rule evaluated will be the allow app1 for engineering rule. If a user attempting to access this application is a member of the engineering group, then they'll be given access. If they're not, this rule will return false, so the next rule on the list will be evaluated. In this case, the block app1 for all users rule. That means if a user is not part of the engineering group, then the behavior here will be to block the app1 critical business application. This principle is one you should apply for any critical application you want to build policy for, even if you build policy for multiple critical applications with multiple criteria. Here we have two side-by-side examples. On the left is a business critical application segment that we've created with an access policy that allows access for the sales group. Here it's the critical app CRM application segment. It allows access for people with a member of sales attribute, and there's a corresponding block policy that blocks the critical app CRM segment for all users. This works the same way as our engineering application on the previous slide. On the right, we have the same setup, but here we've chosen to restrict access to the application with multiple criteria. As a result, to access the critical app payroll UK segment, our users must have both the payroll and UK IDP attributes. And again, there's a corresponding rule here to block access for all users that is placed below the rule that allows access for specific users. Finally, the important thing to remember here is that these granular policies for specific applications should always be placed over any generic application discovery or access segments. Let's take a look at the same policy as it's evolved after 30 days. Here, we still have our allow app1 for engineering rule, with the corresponding rule to block app1 for all users. We've also identified the Payroll UK application as an additional business critical application that we want to control access to. So we've created the rule to allow Payroll UK access for people who are members of Payroll and UK. And again, we have a corresponding block rule for all users. Of course, this pattern can be repeated for any other critical applications that are either discovered or for which you've realized the need to create a segment. Below this, in this example policy, we've gone ahead and created a segment for applications for external third-party contractors. Here, our segment is called Contractor App. We're allowing access to this segment for anyone who has the member of contractor attribute. And then below this, we've created a rule that blocks all applications for the members of the contractor group. This is to make sure that members of the contractor group, who are third-party users who are not part of our organization, do not have access to any of our other business applications, whether they're critical or not. Finally, at the bottom, we still have our wildcard rule since it's only been 30 days since the start of deployment and we want to continue discovery. Finally, here's what our policy can look like on day 90. Here, we still have our defined critical applications, and we probably have several more that have been added since there. We also still have our rules for contractors, and we're still blocking access to all applications for contractors, except for the contractor-specific application segment. The main difference between day 90 and day 30 is you'll notice here at the bottom that our wildcard discovery segment has been replaced. We're no longer doing discovery, allowing access to any applications for any users. Instead, we've created one or more non-critical business application segments that we want all users in our organization to have access to. Note that we'll still want to control access to this segment via posture checks, which we'll discuss in a little bit. This configuration means that our non-critical business applications, which have been regrouped in one or more segments, are widely accessible to all of our users without the need to microsegment these applications. Further down the line, once you mature and progress along the Zero Trust application access journey, you may find that you wish to create specific access policy for specific applications, even if they're non-critical. Doing this follows the same method as the one used to define critical application segment access policies. Create a policy that allows access to your segment or segments for users with one or more specific IDP attributes, and then the corresponding rule below it that blocks access to that application segment for all users. In all cases, the result will be the same. Rules are evaluated top-down. The first rule evaluated will be the one that checks for the IDP attributes you want to use. If a user has those IDP attributes, they will get access to the application. If they don't, the next rule will be evaluated, and that rule will return a block action. This is how you build a secure policy that allows access to specific application segments for specific users while blocking access for other users. One important thing to understand, you'll want to make sure that you build device posture into all of your policies. This is regardless of whether the application segment is for a business-critical application or not. Device posture is a key element in securing access to your applications by making sure that users whose devices might be compromised or which don't meet specific security criteria as defined by your organization are unable to access their applications. Device posture can check several criteria on the user's device. For example, endpoint protection, by checking for the presence of Microsoft Defender, specific antivirus software, CrowdStrike's ZPA score, and other elements. Device security, checking that the user's device is running firewall and antivirus, the OS version, and the level of disk encryption, as well as checking the presence of certain elements that would logically only be present on corporate devices, such as is the device domain joined, or the presence of certain registry values or files which can be pushed via GPO, as well as client certificates and non-exportable private keys. Put together, these mean that you can create policy that will systematically block access to applications if users are found to have devices that are not domain joined or that don't have the latest antivirus version or OS version, etc. This allows you to ensure that application access is secured by your ZPA access policy. ZPA employs a risk-based policy engine, which continuously validates access policies based on a number of criteria. These can be, for example, SAML or SCIM attributes, as discussed in the model policy list, device posture checks, as we've just covered, which can be configured either individually or in combination, client types, and many others. For example, here we've configured an access policy that allows access to the specific segment or segment group only if the user belongs to the OT or IT SCIM groups and is trying to access the application through a client connector and has a specific verified client connector posture profile, in this case checking for Microsoft Defender. Finally, let's discuss a few other ways that application access can be configured. First, to provide secure access to web-based applications for third parties that requiring access to the Zscaler client connector, you can create browser-based access segments. These require a few different things. For example, you'll be required to upload a web server certificate, which will need to be selected as part of the application segment. Note that browser-based access is only possible for HTTP or HTTPS applications, and that internet-side access is always over HTTPS. You'll also need to configure a DNS as a CNAME entry, which is generated when the segment is created, is used as a public DNS entry and will need to be configured to grant access to the application over the internet. You can also optionally configure a user portal so that users can sign in to a web portal and see a tile-based view of all the browser-based applications they have access to in one location. Another thing that segments can be configured for is privileged remote access. Privileged remote access is mainly designed to provide secure SSH or RDP access to applications. Like browser-based access, this is enabled as an access type when configuring an application segment. Once this is done, you'll need to define a PRA portal for clientless and third-party access, and define a PRA console for SSH, RDP, and VNC access via web browser. This will allow you to provide secure access to SSH, RDP, and VNC to your users, whether they are part of your organization or third party. Finally, to provide an additional layer of security for applications that are accessed via a web browser, it's possible to configure ZPA to route traffic through the ZIA web browser isolation module if you have the Zero Trust browser licenses. This allows you to leverage isolation profiles and policy configured as part of the browser isolation or Zero Trust browser configuration and apply that to specific application segments inside ZPA. You can create policy that leverages this in combination with posture checks to, for example, allow direct access to an application if a user is connecting to the application on a device running Zscaler client connector and that is domain joined and has the latest version of their antivirus and OS, but decide to instead provide isolated browser-based access to the same web application if the user's posture check fails against those criteria. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching.